Hello there, and welcome to another episode of Talking Nerdy, the show where we take various events and story arcs from current comics and we cover them. I'm your host, Obi-Wan Jabroni. Now, our story today is The Trial of Magneto, number 1 through 5, written by Leah Williams, with art by Lucas Wernick, and colors by Edgar Delgado. The Hellfire Gala ended in the murder of the Scarlet Witch. X-Factor has been called to investigate the death of Wanda Maximoff using their detailed forensics to work to uncover the precise moments leading to her attack and murder. So, with that, let's start talking nerdy. First up, we have The Trial of Magneto number 1, Part 1, From Parties to Funerals. And we open on Krakoa, and the X-Men, X-Force, and X-Factor are gathered at the site of Scarlet Witch's death. Rachel, Summers, and Dakin start to use their powers in tandem to figure out what happened. And Rachel says, this is where the struggle started. Here, she fought free, started to run, managed 2-3 running steps east before being grabbed again, this time from behind. Then there was another struggle. Oh, I lost my spot. Okay, sorry. This big gap in the leaves here, she was being dragged backwards, forced out of sight. That's how the grass gets torn up here. She was kicking and digging her heels in, wanted to make things harder for her attacker. Good for her. None of this adds up. Why wasn't she using her magic? How does one get a jump on a sorcerer who controls all of reality? What kind of monster would it take to bring her down at all, let alone like this? She's the Scarlet Witch. And we switch to the Resurrection Gardens, where Beast, Eye-Boy, and Prodigy are standing around Scarlet Witch's body. And Beast says that there is blood under her nails, and that it's probably the attackers. And Eye-Boy says, no, that's her blood. This stuff here under her nails, same stuff as all the rest here. I smell her blood starting here, only hers. She was dragged backwards by the neck, one arm hooked around her throat, and the attacker's other hand was shoved hard against the back of her head like this. She couldn't breathe. The tissue damage right here, that's what this means. She was using both hands to pull at. She was fighting so hard to remove the airflow obstruction, crushing her windpipe, that her fingernails ripped back and she began bleeding from her nail beds. But she was clawing at a murder weapon, not her attacker, because there's no biological trace evidence that isn't hers. There's something inorganic. Wanda's hands were being bound behind her back, but there's no one doing it, so it's either magic or metallic. Magic or metallic. And they continue the examination and come to the conclusion that she was killed by strangulations by means of supernatural magnetism. Polaris looks to her feet and says to give her a head start. And we switch to the quiet council chamber. The council is discussing resurrecting Scarlet Witch, and it isn't looking good. Magneto gets pissed and throws a chair, calling them all fools. And Professor X says, Eric, you are somewhat correct on one score. We do have a choice to resurrect the Scarlet Witch, an entirely unique choice at that, one not afforded to any other, seeing as Wanda and Pietro are the sole non-mutants that deceived Cerebro long enough for there to be actual backups. Very, very old backups, but yes, they are there. However, if you find the subject at hand too difficult to discuss, then we will simply proceed straight to the vote and no longer entertain your debate tactics. You will get nowhere with the pageantry in here. X-Factor's forensic pathology unit is continuing Wanda's autopsy at this very moment with the X-Men in attendance. As a transparency measure, the autopsy is being conducted in the X-Factor's corpse garden, and there is where there is an operating theater. And Magneto cuts him off and says, "You allowed multiple potential subjects with supernatural abilities to remain present at the time of her autopsy. Have you all lost your minds? Someone could be tampering with the evidence." And Professor X yells out, "Enough. Those in favor of a non-mutant resurrection for the Scarlet Witch, raise your hands." And we see 3 people raise their hands, and very well. 3 votes in favor, and those opposed, and the whole rest of the room raises their hand. Then it's settled. The Scarlet Witch's closest friends and Avenger associates will be immediately informed of her murder, and that we are taking the appropriate actions to seek justice on her behalf, and when they may come collect her remains. Eric, I'm very sorry for your loss, but we cannot resurrect the Scarlet Witch. And shit. Magneto's pissed and uses his powers to start to squeeze Professor X's helmet around his head. Kate phases her hand into his chest and tells him to stop or he dies. He stops and storms off out of the room. He goes outside and is walking across the island when he is stopped by the X-Men, X-Force, and X-Factor. And Magneto says, "So, you think I killed Wanda?" And North Star tells him to come with them quietly, please. Magneto raises into the air and says, "No, I don't think I will." X-23 and Wolverine charge at him, and he knocks them away as Daken drives his claws into Magneto's back. He shakes them off as a magnetic dome forms around him, and Polaris approaches. They each throw metal at each other, and Magneto says, "Cease this foolishness, daughter. You know you asked me once how I would describe your personality and assumed that I had no answer when I was merely biting my tongue. I now believe it was an error on my part to spare your feelings at the cost of your grasp on reality. Because if you were to ask me again, I would tell you the truth you so desperately lack an understanding of. That you are an unhinged and inconsistent at best." And one of the metal shards hit her in the shoulder. Sorry. Hit her in the shoulder, and she falls to the ground as the rest of the team come to her side for support. I'm sorry. The rest of the team comes to her side for support. Polaris raises up, pissed and crying, and yells out to him, "You tried to break me too, tried to rearrange the pieces of me back to your perfect daughter, but you failed. Your efforts backfired, and you only made me stronger. Is that what happened to Wanda? Your efforts at making her more biddable to your machinations failed, so you cleaned up after yourself. You killed her." And just before she unleashes her power, Magneto disappears, leaving only his helmet as it falls to the ground. And we see Quicksilver pounding on Magneto as they speed through the air and the ground. North Star sees him and stops him and takes him up into the sky, and Quicksilver starts to cry and says, "I always knew it would be you, Magneto. I always knew it would be you who killed her, just like you always talked about doing. She was only ever broken in your eyes, Magneto, and she was just unwell. My sister, she was a very sick woman. She just needed help, some fucking compassion for once. It was my job to protect her, and I failed. How could I fail?" And the others gather up the now unconscious Magneto and take him to the healing gardens. And we switch, and we see the original Brotherhood at the bar drinking and mourning Scarlet Witch. And we get a monologue from the Scarlet Witch saying, "Grief is a knife wound. Gale forces pain slam you in with a shocking blast. Loss levels you. You were not prepared. After a time, you began to write yourself. I am healing. You may think I am moving on. But then comes a moment in which you unexpectedly recall all that has been lost. And with this, a new burst of bitterly efficient new wind. One that slices cleanly through all the fresh protective layers you managed to build back up around your heart. It carves open a promise of a scar and leaves you gasping for air in one cold swooping gust. It levels you again. You may have to repeat this process several more times before realizing that you simply must stay down. This is just how your life will be from now on. You have no choice but to permanently accommodate the hunting wind because there is no evading the pain. It never leaves you. But you become more adept at managing it. Eventually, your grief becomes background ache. Then the wind knifes and bites through the nothingness. You let nothingness you left standing in its path as it blows, hurting yet harmless. A lonely wind left howling its pain throughout the black and empty space where a love once tended to use to live, whistling through the haunted ruins of you. And we see Scarlet Witch in a voided place, floating among pink and purple flowers, and the monologue continues. My winds howl in the millions. I am the Scarlet Witch, and I am intimately acquainted with grief. Every single person I have ever harmed, I grieve for them all. I ache for what has been lost, what I have caused, a tempest of anguish. And now I grieve for myself, because I was killed. I died, and yet I know that I am not dead. And that ends our first issue. Leading us to Trial of Magneto number 2, Part 2. Condolences to the bereaved. And we open in Magneto's bedroom. And Magneto is sitting on his bed reading a book when he sighs and puts his book down as he gets up and leaves the room, saying, "Enjoying the view, Charles? I know you're here. You forget I have decades of experience when it comes to recognizing the grating presence of your telepathic meeting. What game are you even playing at, Charles? Am I being surveyed alone in my own home in the hopes that I might just happen to confess to the murder while talking aloud to myself? What is the meaning of this?" And we switch to the healing gardens, and we see Magneto still unconscious, laying on a table, and Professor X and Hope are using their powers to soothe him and try to learn the truth about Scarlet Witch's death. Meanwhile, outside, we see Jean Grey, Cyclops, and Wolverine standing nearby as the Avengers Quinjet lands. Captain America, Iron Man, Wasp, and Vision get off the jet, and Jean embraces Vision and says she's so sorry for his loss. Cyclops welcomes them to the island and offers them a tour before they retrieve the body. Elsewhere, we see Northstar, Dakin, and Rachel standing around an empty Cerebro cradle, and Rachel uses her power to learn that Magneto himself stole the helmet. And we switch yet again to the unknown void, and we see Scarlet Witch floating in the void, and we get an internal monologue that says, "Magic is lawless. I coalesce into being from the yearning clutches of eternity, drawing forth new form out of void, stardust, and darkness. And then I run before the cloaked figure reappears and kills me once more. It isn't a normal death. I burst apart into fragments of life, of vestigial confetti scattered across the astral realm. And then nothing. Darkness. Darkness and then rebirth. Darkness and then I wake up." And we go back to the healing gardens, and Hope is alone with Magneto. And she wakes him up and says, "Wake up. We don't have much time before Xavier gets back. Wake up. Time to go. You need to make sure the Avengers don't see Wanda's body. Now. Do you understand? Do you understand? Do not let them see her body." And Magneto looks at her and says, "I understand." And we switch to elsewhere at the Boneyards. The X-Men and Avengers are walking down a hallway with some members of X-Factor when Metal shoots into the room and pins all the speedsters to the wall. Jean and Rachel throw up a shield, and we hear Magneto outside demanding the Avengers be sent out now. Polaris steps up and says, "Let me handle this," and she goes outside to confront her father. But as soon as she reaches him, everyone else pours out of the boneyard and attacks Magneto anyway. The Avengers charge in first, and Magneto rips Cap's shield away and takes out Iron Man with it, as well as slamming Vision to the ground. Magneto sees North Star's husband and wraps him in metal and yells, "Leave, Avengers, or he dies." North Star flies up in front of him and yells at him, saying, "Fine, they'll leave. Now let my husband go." And he turns to the Avengers, "Get out. Get the fuck out." And Jean flies up and tells him to stay calm. He responds, "Let's not. I'll kill you all in an instant if that's what is required to save Kyle. Shall we find out?" And Caps asks if hurting his own people is what Magneto wants. And Magneto says no, and lowers himself to the ground and says no. He just wants them to leave. Cap asks why he is keeping them from taking Wanda home, and he yells that none of them know what it. And Magneto yells that none of them know what home was for Wanda. Quicksilver walks up and says he thinks he does, actually. Magneto looks at him and then looks down and falls to his knees, raising his arms up in front of him and says, "Fine, it was me. I did it. I'm the one who killed her, and I wanted you to leave because I'm guilty of first-degree murder. Now take me away before I change my mind and decide to bring this place down to its knees after all. Hell, what are you waiting for? I murdered the Scarlet Witch." And a voice above them says, "I'm going to have to disagree." And they look up to see the Scarlet Witch flying in. She lands in front of them all and says, "Hello, everyone. I'm really moved that you all came to help me. But really, everything is all right. I just want to put this all behind me and let things go back to normal." She runs up to Vision and embraces him in a hug and a kiss. And that ends this issue. Taking us to Trial of Magneto number 3, Part 3, Schrodinger's Corpse. And we open on Krakoa, and Vision lets go of Scarlet Witch, and Iron Man questions if it's really her, and asks where she was and why she had them think that she was dead. Wanda grabs her head and starts to shake, saying, "Please stop," when a whoosh and a wind fly by them, and Magneto is scooped up. North Star slams him to the ground, pounding on him, and he stops and looks at him and says, "That was just a preview. I've been enhanced since we last fought Magneto. Threaten my husband again, and I'll show you the extent of how much I improved." Wanda's reappearance alters nothing about X-Factor's investigation. An attack occurred, and you are still a suspect, Magneto. Also, and he turns to Cap, "Kyle wanted me to tell you that dinner will be ready soon, and the Avengers are still welcome to join us." And he smiles and walks away with his husband. Later, the group walks down a hall and are met by Wiccan and Speed. They embrace their mom, and she lets go and asks who they are. They look at each other confused, and Wiccan says that she isn't completely their mother. He senses something wrong, like part of her is missing. And Rachel and Jean approach her and offer to look inside her mind. They find what she's been missing, that she is missing the last years from before M-Day to now. They decide to transmit her memories back to her and to fill the gaps. And as her memories flood back, a rumble shakes the island, and we learn that 3 giant creatures start attacking. The group scrambles, and Scarlet Witch goes with her sons, while the others go to the fight. Mutant and Avenger alike try to drive the monsters away with no luck, and we learn that they are self-healing. Cyclops orders all non-combatants to evacuate the island immediately. And we switch back to the Void. And we see Wanda running from a white-cloaked figure, and we get an internal monologue saying, The wheel spins, another cycle of death and rebirth here. But for a moment, something shifted. A part of me departed. I thought I'd finally found a way out of here, but instead, I woke up with even fewer memories. Maybe this is the way of things in the afterlife. There's no light at the end of the tunnel, nor is there a tunnel. There is only a fight. There is only a test of your will to survive. And Wanda stops and yells no and picks up a battle axe and says, I get it now. I'm supposed to kill you. Chaos magic. This place is made of chaos magic. It is of me. You will not kill me in this place again. And the figure stops and says, finally, you figured it out. And they remove their hood to reveal an old woman, Scarlet Witch. And that ends this issue. Leading us to Trial of Magneto number 4, Part 4, Time to Face the Truth. We open on Krakoa, and Scarlet Witch, Wiccan, and Speed are walking down a hallway, and we get an internal monologue from Wanda. Some mornings my body wakes up before my mind does. For a single incandescent moment, I am nothing but awake and alive, holding my wrists up in the morning light and marveling without understanding my ownership of it. I only know I am alive. That's all that registers in the long seconds before my conscious mind quietly slips back into my body. I only recall that I am Wanda Maximoff, once my internal channels of magic are flooded with primordial knowings, as the ancient ley lines tickle my senses and welcome me back to the waking life. And those first moments before I'm aware of who and what I am, when all I know is that I am, and I am alive, sometimes I wonder if that is what it feels like to be a newborn. I won't recall any of this for another few hours yet. Being born is hard work. And they go through a door to outside and they see the monsters in the distance. Wiccan tells Speed that he thinks their mom is the cause of the monsters, and he takes her hand and rushes to a secluded area to explain it to her. Elsewhere in the void, we see the two Wandas fighting, and young Wanda asks why she is doing this. And old lady Wanda says, this is the Eldritch Orchard, and I'm doing this because sometimes love hurts. I mean, this is what you want, isn't it? Someone to punish you for all your sins, to absolve you. You can't lie to me, Wanda. I remember being you. You have to let it go. All that guilt, all that turmoil eating you up inside. It manifests as these monsters, endangering everyone you love, even your children. And Wanda screams out no. Meanwhile, on Krakoa, Wanda screams no, I don't believe you, and freaks out, blasting them both back. They get on their feet and Wiccan yells out saying, this is why no one trusts you. This is why everyone is afraid to be around you. I lived my whole life defending you, Mom. My whole life. You taught me so much about magic that I can't even remember now. These creatures attacking the island, you made them because you refused to take accountability for your future. It's time to forgive yourself, Wanda. Stop beating yourself up. Don't you get it? We're gonna die if you don't. And Wanda screams out, all right, and a blast of light pulls the two Wandas from the void into our reality. And we get another internal monologue from Wanda. Oh, I know what this is. This is healing. I am accepting and forgiving. I am reuniting myself, my past, my present, my future. Spin the wheel. And the three Wandas split up and each go to a different monster and kills it while the internal monologue continues. Once I reconciled my past, present, and future, the monsters became easier to quell. They they were made of the Eldritch Orchard. And the three Wandas, after killing the beast, converge again, and they all touch each other's hands, and a light envelops them, and they all merge back into a single Scarlet Witch. She sees Magneto and hugs him, saying, I'm back, Daddy. All of me is back. And she turns to the mutants and Avengers alike and says, I know who attacked me, and I'm sorry for all of this. And that ends this issue. Taking us to our final issue, The Trial of Magneto, number 5, part 5, all cards on the table. Now, we open on Krakoa, and Scarlet Witch says she knows who attacked her, and everyone asks who, and she points to the Toad. Later, at the Quiet Council chamber, we see the Quiet Council in their seats with X-Factor and the Avengers in seats on the outside of the circle watching. Toad is brought in, and Professor X asks if he knows why he is here. And Toad says yes, he attacked Wanda on the night of the Hellfire Gala. And Prodigy steps forward with a stone in a bag, and he says, X-Factor would like to present further evidence. We believe this is the murder weapon. It is made of an enchanted metal called Uru. It's been specifically spelled to dispatch the Scarlet Witch. You can see her sigil on it here. We found this in Toad's home, and it has Toad's fingerprints on it. And Professor X looks down and says, very well. The punishment shall be exile. And vines shoot up and wrap around Toad and start to drag him into the pit as he yells out, screaming. I only did what needed doing. Wanda tore the Brotherhood apart. She turned her back on us and betrayed her father. So I helped you. For the Brotherhood. I did this for Magneto. And he is pulled the rest of the way into the pit, and the council dismisses, and Wanda tells the Avengers to go back home, and she will be along shortly. She has family matters to deal with here still. And they hug her and tell her bye, and she's approached by Polaris, and she tells Polaris that she needs her help. Magneto quickly leaves the room and goes to his chamber and falls to his knees and cries as we get an internal monologue from Scarlet Witch saying, I think Father needs some time to think alone. Guilt is a kind of grief. Regrets about what ifs and should haves and once wish are all searing, hurtful things. Magneto is a good man who has done terrible things. His biggest secret is that it was always out of love. His way of loving is expressed through rages and injustices, or choosing to isolate himself so as to not be burdened to others with his inner pain, which has been conditioned to view as his own weakness. No matter the cost, no matter how much it pains him, this is how a tortured, traumatized, magnificent man knows how to love through trial. It takes a lot of practice. And no one taught him how to love in any other way, but he taught me that. And we switch to later on, elsewhere on the island. Scarlet Witch draws a large sigil on the ground and turns to face Polaris, Legion, and Proteus, and she says, spin the wheel. Proteus, Legion, Polaris, you're the prodigal three. 3 is a very important number mystically. It is an important number. And what your parents represent to Krakoa makes you 3 the most important figures here. It just felt right. Maybe your access to the astral plane, but I know it's you 3 who need to be here. Do you trust me? And Legion says, not even in the slightest. Well, thank you for being game to try anyway. Plus, it's going to work. It has to. And she has them stand at the 3 points of her sigil and tells them to raise their hands, palmed up to the sky. They do so and nothing happens, and Polaris asks if it's working. Wanda says no, but it should, and she knows that it's these 3 that she needs. Polaris steps back and tells Wanda to try it in her place, and that she is just as much a daughter of Magneto as she is. And Wanda hesitantly takes her spot, and they try again. The sigil instantly starts to glow, and we get an internal monologue from Wanda yet again saying, past, present, and future are all the same to someone with my ability. It's easy for me to fold them into tiny, tiny pieces. Easy for me to gather them up. And it's easy for me to create a pocket dimension collecting these pieces because all these pieces are all possibilities. And my mastery is infinite possibility. And then, with a little mutant magical assistance, it's easy for me to use this confetti I made out of time and possibilities to build Krakoa their own Elysian fields. And we switch to the night of the gala itself. Wanda drags Magneto to the clearing where she was found dead, and she says, "This is the only way I can make it. You're likely the only one who cares about me enough to try to bring me back should something go wrong. And you can do this. I can do this. I can make things right, but I have to go through Krakoa's resurrection channels first in order for it to work. I can always find my way back from death, but without mutant resurrection, don't you see? It's the only way." And Magneto looks down and says, "Very well, Wanda." And Wanda gets to her knees, and Magneto asks what she's doing, and she says, "Using glamours, making it look real. There won't be any call for my resurrection, not unless they suspect foul play, I think. I need you to make sure they find my body, and that I can somehow access resurrection channels. Talk to Hope. She'll help you with this. The problem is, if Mutant Con suspects you and I are conspired on this, I'm afraid they will reject the gift, and then this will all be for nothing, have been for nothing, and I don't know how to solve that." And Magneto says he'll take care of it. She makes the stone sigil made of that they found in Toad's room, and they give it to him, saying, "Before I love you," before she uses magic to strangle and kill herself. And we switch back to the current time, 3 days after Wanda's triumvirate spell. And we see Hope resurrecting John Proudscar, aka Thunderbird, who we have not seen alive since the 70s. And while this is happening, we get a monologue from Professor X saying, 20 million mutants were added to the resurrection queue the other night. 20 million souls who were lost before Cerebro started its backups and before their X gene could manifest. Wanda warned me of this, that the egg could potentially look different. Time was compacted, folded in on itself into a composite possibility, allowing Cerebro to scan across time and space itself for every mutant who fell between the cracks of the resurrection protocol, which means now no one will ever be lost again. From now on, no mutant can ever be lost to us, ever again. What we have gained is a permanent offshore backup for our loved ones, protected from human hands deep in the astral plane. It can never be sabotaged or touched by non-mutants. Imagine an opt-in Elysium Fields exclusive to mutants. You can enter yourself into the resurrection queue now if you want, as an alternative to the Crucible. All you have to do is walk up the steps and cross into this next room. And, sorry, walk into this next room. And it exists in its own pocket dimension, a liminal space between life and death. We're calling it the waiting room. But how? How is this all possible? And Hope looks to Professor X and smiles and says, "The Scarlet Witch." Now, later that night, we see Polaris, Magneto, and Wanda standing near a fire with some kids and Exodus. And Exodus starts to tell a story, saying, "Listen closely, young ones, for it is time we begin a tale of how the Pretender became the Redeemer. Once upon a time, there was a witch, a Scarlet Witch." And that ends this story. I hope you enjoyed this week's video. Join us next week as we cover Kang the Conqueror number 1 through 5. Thanks for watching, and as always, remember to like, subscribe, and share our video to help spread our brand through the world. Also, leave a comment down below. Feedback is always welcome. Now, you can follow us on the Jabroni Nerd Facebook page as well as YouTube. So, until next week, guys, keep talking nerdy.